Thank you for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast. This evening, I am delighted to welcome PJ Vazel. So welcome to the podcast, PJ.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I'm really always so impressed when people speak a second language and do interviews like this in second languages, which is part of the reason I'm trying to learn French once a week and trying to upskill in that area. But thank you for coming on and speaking not in French and English. I have so much respect for that, so thank you very much. Anyone that doesn't know who you are, PJ, would you mind just giving us a bit of a background on you, what you've done before, education-wise, and what you're currently doing now?
So I was an art student, and during my art studies, I began being chronicler for the International Federation of Athletics. It was in 2004, and the same year I began coaching as well. So I had a background already about a lot of research on sports science and sports statistics, really in a historical perspective and data analysis from a historical perspective. And that's how I came into coaching with this study in my bag and no experience at all. So I was fortunate to have a lot of mentors through the years who helped me and guide me and told me what not to do rather than what to do. So I started coaching sprinters from Nigeria, from Greece, from France finally, and also from Senegal and Switzerland later. And I've been participating to all World Champs and Olympics since 2004 and 5. And I began coaching a thrower in 2015. And so I'm less involved in sprinting now, more in throwing, and still at the world champs and medal level. That's a great last couple of years since I came back to France, working with elite thrower, because we share actually some passion regarding sports history. So that's very nice to share this with my athlete.
Where did that love of sports history come from?
I really don't know. I think I like the search of origins. I think it goes beyond sports, but obviously it found an interest in sports. And what I like is to find. Also, when I began coaching, I had some ideas, but I was not sure how to implement them. So I was searching what was done before, not to replicate the mistakes and to go faster. So I wanted to know how the weights were evolving through the decades, even centuries, weight training or resistance training, assisted training, the history of techniques, of course, of rules and regulations. All those things are my passion when I'm not on the track. I spend a lot of time doing researches on libraries and videos and exchanging stuff with nerds like me.
So when you say, did you say chronicler? A chronicler of World Championships, Olympics? Talk to us a little bit about that, because that's interesting.
Okay, so there was a forum on International Federation website at that time, and we were trading information and statistics and results from the past with other forumers. And one day, the correspondent for France for IAAF asked me, "Are you interested to write the story of the retirement of Marie-Josée Pérec, which is the most famous sprinters in France?" It was 2004. And I said yes, and I pretended I could write in English because I was excited to write this story. So I was not speaking at all in English and even less writing. So with the help of a friend, I managed to come up with an article. It was quite well. And actually, incidentally, this girl who eventually became a friend, Carol Fuchs, moved to Canada and left her place in France. So I became the French correspondent for IAAF. So I went from meet to meet to do reports, interviews, and previews. I met a lot of coaches, athletes, journalists, historians. I spent my time on warm-up area rather than on the stands. I was more interested in the backstage, and so that's how I met my first athlete. He was looking for a coach. He was 19 years old. He was just new on the circuit in 2004. His name was Olusoji Fasuba. And I needed to have his biography and who was his coach. He had no coach, and he asked me to find him one. So I asked around, and nobody was willing to help him. So actually, some people told me, "Coach him, start, go ahead." I was like, "I'm 23. I'm barely older than him. I have no experience." But guys like Dan Paff, for example, was very nice with me, telling me, "Yes, you can." Actually, just replying to my question, he was giving me a lot of self-confidence. He really, through the years, he was a great resource and great friend and a great inspiration, a great mentor for me. And it worked. With this athlete, he became world Indian champion. He still has the African record 985 in 2006. It was a great year of discovery because he had no coach. I never had athlete, so it clicked very well. We had no bad habits, and we were discovering everything. We were eager to learn and to go to meet from. We did the round of the world. We were both very young, very scared, I guess. And he was very motivated because every race he had was a way of living for him. And coaching a Nigerian like this was not the same. I know coaching a French who already has, his main incomes outside just of running. So it was very a special school for me to start with athletes who were so motivated. And we had basically nothing. So I was traveling with him and I was sleeping on the floor, and because I didn't have hotel rooms or even ticket meals. And I can tell you that we were really motivated. Maybe sometimes I'm like, did I lost this motivation I had, this fire we had inside? But what I learned then is that really you meet some athletes who have extra motivation, and they are killers on the track. And that's the kind of people you are going to meet. So you have to prepare your athletes for that.
So at this point, you'd no formal coaching qualifications?
Nope.
Okay. So where did you start? Do you just reach out to the guys that you'd met on the circuit and just ask their advice, where to go, what to read, what to take in?
So, doing research on sports history, you come a huge part and unexplored, unfortunately, is the history of training methods. So I kind of learned by accident this kind of things, the methodology of training, which had no really relevance because I was more looking for results than methodology, but I just integrated it. So now on the working with an athlete is completely different, and he was already an elite athlete, very talented one. And the most difficult for me was to gauge the volume of training. And basically what I did is cutting everything in half from what I was seeing in the books. I kind of feel what he needed. And this is not from the books, it's a connection with the athlete. And another thing, and I needed my mentors to teach me that, is trust the athlete. Now there's a bias because probably later I choose the athletes, or they choose me because we had a trust relationship. But I really believe that trusting the athlete, observing him, listening to what he or she has to say, because they have a lot of experience. They use their body once or twice a day as their main tool, as their main work tool. They know much more than anything. They have an incredible experience at the highest level. And as coaches, we have to listen more to them. Also, as the medical guys need to listen more to what they have to say, because they have an incredible experience. It's completely different to treat a sportsman or a fit guy than an elite athlete, because they have years of experience using their body, and they have very, very accurate way to explore it, and it's fascinating.
Do you think that because you'd not come through a traditional path, you were more willing to look at or speak to the athlete and get their opinion, take in what they were saying, rather than a traditional coaching path, which may have made you think that I know best?
I don't think so, because I think we all start from scratch. The funny thing with my debut was that I started writing in English, but I was still not fluent at all in English. So I had nothing much to say to them in English. I was just listening to them and not much speaking. And that's better, because I think as a young coach, I thought I knew a lot. And I think if I had started with a French athlete, I would have told them everything I knew, which is really wrong. That's a wrong way to do, the wrong approach. So basically I was shutting my mouth and listening to them, watching them. And if I needed really something to say, if I had something important to say, I was managing to tell them. But that was important, so it was not lost in all the words, The important thing I had to say was the only thing I was saying. So I kept this method with all my athletes.
So what language were you communicating in then? English? Were you communicating?
Yes.
Were you talking English? Okay.
Pidgin English.
Pidgin English. Okay. Yes. Was your athlete's English good?
Yes, he was Nigerian, so obviously his mother language was English, but they were usually speaking broken English, Pidgin English. So I got the African accent when I started coaching, and I got some words, some slang words, and I was not really aware of if it was appropriate language or slang language. But yeah, another thing is that I was young, and although I was afraid to ask questions to people were not afraid at all to tell me their secrets. So I remember, for example, in 2005, at World Champs, my athlete was the only one who was not willing to do weights at all. He didn't believe in weights, but he was the first out of the semifinals. He was the fifth guy. He didn't make the final. So what I did after is I went to every athlete or their coach who made the final and asked, are you doing weights? If yes, what weights are you doing? So they all replied to me. So I went to my athlete, look, you're the only one who is not doing weights at all. And you're the only one who's not entering the final. So maybe next year we have to change something. And that he did. And in 2006, he did very well.
Interesting.
985 and so on.
Nice. So let's have a little chat about that, the history of of sprinting, and maybe bring it a little bit up to date. So it's quite, maybe not 1900, but in the last like 20, 25 years of how things have changed. Because even from an outsider, someone that grew up watching the Olympics and watched the 100-meter final, the people, the athletes and how they looked, which I'm guessing is led by their training methods, look a lot different to what they do now. Is there similar comparisons when you look at, and you've analysed and looked into their training methods with how it differs to 25 years ago versus now?
So first thing is that I believe that what has changed in nothing much has changed in the last 20 years compared to the early 20th century or even after World War II, where every 4 years there were huge improvements in methods and in science. In the last 20 years, I mean, it's difficult. Technology, yes, but the concepts have not evolved, sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Some countries during the Cold War, especially in the East, it was very important to win medals. So it was very important to reach the space and to land on the moon. And, they hired the best scientists there to work on these projects. It was basically the same to win medals in sports. So there were meetings, brainstorms with a lot of scientists. And the question we have now as coaches or scientists, they already have the same questions back then. So the difference is that, of course, the technologies, I mean, the high tech is different, but they found solutions to answer their questions. Some few concepts are not the same. If you look at history, like take the ancient Greece, they weren't very concerned about time because it didn't make sense to compare times and to record it, probably because they didn't have a proper way to record it electronically, of course. And time became more important when we were able to measure it with accuracy in the late 18th century. That's where sprint races started to evolve also, because we could time. And while before there was no time and only place, it changed, and it probably influenced a lot of the training methods during the 19th and 20th century. That being said, the concepts regarding how to improve and how to get faster, there's a kind of loop, because maybe there is a kind of focus on high intensity now, not only in sprinting, but also in weight training and in team sport. But it's a throwback to what was done in early 20th century, when athletes started to specialize in certain events. Before, they were all-round athletes in the 19th century, and you could be a hammer thrower and a sprinter in the meantime. And physiques were not very specialized. You can see that also in the ancient Greece, where you could win the short sprints, the long sprints, the armor race, the Hippotodromos, and the long distance race. A guy won all four, Leonidas. But now, in early 20th century, there were bias towards specialization, and that you were born either strong or fast or endurance, with some psychological features also attributed to those inner talents. You were born fast, but you were made endurance guy, pedestrian. It tells you that for sprinting, you just needed to sprint and don't go against your nature. And I think there's a kind of things like this. We see it now. You should sprint with low volume and high intensity, but that's what they did back then. And if we look at the results now and before, you improve very fast in what you are doing because you are mostly doing the same thing, but you reach a plateau very soon, and you get tired and you don't improve anymore and you even regress. That's why, but I digress already. But there are more efficient ways because it was already tested and tried, and method went to the opposite direction with a lot of general things. General training, specific training was coined as early as 13.8, but gain more and more popularity because they could see that they could improve over a longer time during winter time and get ready for summer competitions. Because if you only sprint fast, you're already within a few weeks already.
Interesting.
That's the concept of variability in training, which became very important and very well understood in the 60s. Maybe it's kind of forgotten now, and we try to get very specific on top speed and power, find the exact power you need to train. And it's interesting that, it comes in cycles, and a little like training, you're training with training cycles, and whether you call it blocks or whatever, it looks the same actually.
Mm-hmm. So what about the introduction of strength training? And that was obviously a big improvement for your athlete when you went round the finalists and realised that everyone else was doing it apart from you or your athlete. Yeah. What impact? Obviously, there was an obvious impact, as you've just said, but in terms of an industry improvement to incorporate weight training, and did that at one point go not too far, because we'll never know where it's too far, but did it start to become too important and now it's regressed? Do you find that's the case?
So in the 19th century, sprinters were doing weights because they were also throwers, powerlifters. They were doing all kind of things, and it was working. Then with specialization, there was also the idea that you need to be light, and doing weights you get big, so it's wrong. Now you can still find sprinters doing some weights just for conditioning. Using dumbbells, you can find it in books from any age, really. What really changed was science. Try to prove scientifically that it's meaningful to lift weights or not. So, but it was done because, as I said, in Eastern Europe, everything, even politics, had to have a scientific justification, or so-called scientific justification. But what they did, they did groups with athletes doing weights, athletes not doing weights, who's improving the most, who gets the most results. So it was done in 46 with Der Van Essen. He found that throwers, sprinters, jumpers who add weights to their training have better results, competition in their main event. So that's kind of interesting because it was a landmark study, and all the other authors there refer to this, of course, because it was a seminal study. What was interesting and what was lost with years is that he was pointing out that, okay, you need to do weights, but it should not be to the sacrifice of amplitude of movement and relaxation of movement, especially with throwers and sprinters. where you can get strong, but you lose amplitude, you lose the feeling of what you do. And this advice get lost because when they started to quantify training in the 50s, they noticed that the more you train, the better the results, which is true. I mean, it was observation. You cannot deny it. They increase year after year the training, and results also increased. So it was the open door to do more and more, and to go into that idea that you should also train weight lift as much as possible. There were experience from the field that there was a limit to that. It was found in sprinters, in throwers also, unexpectedly, because it was, of course, very early understood that throwers need more weight than sprinters because they have an implement, and the loads on the body, as Zatsirski showed, are very important. The constraints on the body during throwing, and like the hammer throw Olympic champion in '60, there were already Soviet authors and coaches and scientists that were saying he's doing too much weights. But still, during 10 years, there was still that focus on weight training, and more and more and more. But far from a unified thing, the research was full of contradiction and controversies. And you get really fights between scientists, coaches, and it's funny to read the articles, the Russian articles back then, because it's really harsh between them.
Is it like Twitter in 2020?
Yes, it is. It's almost the same, because and it belonged also to the philosophy of those countries, where you improve with dialectics, with contradiction, with the negation of negation, with and that's how it works. And that's how science works, actually, right? If you think of it, there are many theorists about science, but one of the main science principle is that scientific knowledge improve in denying what has done before. I mean, testing it, and you come with new paradigms, and every Olympic cycle you got something new from those countries, because the competition was fierce and it was not unified at all. It's really contradictory with the spirits and philosophy of the science back then. So if we think about weight training, they soon discovered that there was an optimal amount of weight training, that there was not that while it was very important to improve your max strength, you needed to improve your speed as well, especially with throwers and weightlifters. So they started to record the bar speed, to record the jumps in the late 50s, as opposed to the max squats recording in a static way, which can be seen as the expression of maximum strength or absolute strength, depending on who you read. And on the other side, you get the jump, and that's what is done now with the apps we all have, and the new technologies, where they were just recording jumps with a rubber a tape.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, a tape, and force plates also, when they were doing it in the lab in the late 50s. But so all those concepts were the only concept, I think, which was not really important for them, was the concept of max power.
Okay.
Which is really important now. I don't think it was relevant back then because of the variability of training. They found that to improve your strength or your power, you need to improve your max strength your speed strength. But in between, just focusing on that max power doesn't make sense because you need variability. And also it clicks with the concept of dialectics because you have a dialectic between strength and speed. On other events, you've got a dialectic between strength and endurance or speed and endurance. And the variability of training, meaning that you either sometimes even within a workout will work strength and speed and all variation of it. It worked because they tried it. They tried people working with the same implement, for example, in throws with the 7K in shot put, or people using 5K, 8K, 9K, where the people with using a variation of power were improving more and getting better results than the people using the exact power, specific power of their events. In throws, it's easy. The specific power is the power you use at highest intensity with the competition implement with the 7K, for example, in hammer throw shot put. Only using it is less efficient statistically with athletes than changing.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because variability. But why variability works is because you are also improving your technique and feeling of the muscles, because they could find with EMG, with recording the muscle electric activity, that it's not the same whether you throw with a 6K or 8K, but all those small variations makes you a better improve your technique because it varies your ability, also changing the intensity. They found that there's optimum intensity. That's the best intensity is not 100% or 99%. It's between 90 and 95%, because this way it's optimum in all the principles of training, because you can do a high enough volume, because volume is important. You don't improve just doing 3 reps of anything per day. So you do a quite large volume. The intensity is high enough to be relevant for your nervous system and to be high stress enough for your body, but you don't sacrifice the precision of movement, the amplitude of movement, the consistency of movement, and the speed of movement, and you can train more often. While if you train 100% every time, you're crushing your nervous system, your ability to train in a high enough volume, and also you lose your relaxation, which is more important. And when you interview athletes of power speed sports who broke world records, most of them will tell you it felt easy.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't feel like 100% effort, and they will tell you I can do more. And at training, it brings very interesting questions regarding which intensity you should, or should you try your max effort every time in your technical events, in sprinting, jumping, throwing, or even lifting? Are you willing to always do your max at training? Is it max load in kg or max velocity in meters per second? Is it wise to always employ a high max voluntary effort? Are you not sacrificing something very, very important that athletes are telling us in their best performance in competition? That it didn't feel like max effort.
Just bringing it up to the present day, PJ, one of the biggest things, I suppose, that I've seen over the recent, probably last 10 years is the influence of Franz Bosch and Franz Bosch's methods that have been integrated within the team sport environment and I'm guessing, the track and field environment. Am I putting too much emphasis on that influence? Has his methods had a big influence? And if so, what are your personal thoughts on his methods.
So Franz Bosch, I've attended a presentation of him about a decade ago. It was either 2002 or 12. I can't remember exactly. And I've read parts of his book, not the latest one, but the coordination one, I think. This is not the way I enter into my research, because I love old stuff, and so I'd rather spend a lot of time in translating old articles, because that's my main passion. I'm not a fan of new things. So I really did enjoy Franz Bosch's presentation. It was in UK, I can't remember where, or Sweden maybe.
He presented at the UKSCA conference in 2012, I think. Maybe that was it. I don't know.
Yes.
It doesn't matter.
The thing is that, yes, he presented many exercises, of course, his philosophy, but he presented a lot of interesting exercises. I think people focus more on the exercises than the philosophy behind them, on how to use them, or the progression. I think that's a problem, because and I think it's getting worse, because 10 years ago there was no Instagram or Twitter or stuff. Now you've got athletes asking, I want to do this exercise because it's fancy, and some great athlete is using it. And the duty of the coach is to explain that this is a great exercise, but you're not there, or you've passed this level. It's too easy for you. Usually it's too difficult for you, but you don't say it this way, right? You say that there's a progression to do it. Like before doing all those balance stuff and crazy stuff with the bar on one leg and stuff, you need to do it static on one leg. Just try to stay on one feet, close the eyes, and stay 20 seconds. I guarantee that most of the guys are falling down because they don't have the basics. This I got from a great athlete, one of the greatest sprinters, Merlin from Jamaica.
Yes.
Been an elite athlete for 3 decades. And I was asking her about jumping. And she said, well, the first jump jump exercise I do, is standing on one foot, closed eye, and I try to keep my balance. I was like, is it jumping? Yes, because I'm preparing my muscles. Because if I don't do it, I know I will get injured later. So it looks easy, but try it. And yes, I fell down. So everything has a progression. And the thing is that the jump in the train, in the wagon, where Franz Bosch is in terms of exercises, but I think most of what he presents is far too much difficult for the athletes, even elite athletes. And many athletes are great compensators. That means that they develop crazy skills that hide great weaknesses, and that those weaknesses you need to address. And sometimes fancy, complicated, and complex exercises are not pointing the finger on that weak part of the chain.
That's interesting. That first quote, I think it was focusing on the exercise rather than the philosophy behind it. I think that's a really key quote and a key message there. That, like you say, people see it on Instagram, people see it in the book, and that gets translated onto a program for an athlete who may not be quite there yet. and may never get there, but it's different. It looks cool, and that ropes people into wanting to incorporate it rather than understanding the methods behind it and therefore making the decision whether it is appropriate or not. And I think that probably goes for lots of things in life. Now we've got Instagram and Twitter and all this information. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, we have to step back, and I think that the duty of coaches to tell the context of things. Each exercise has a context. If you put it out, and I mean, it has some. Sometimes I find ideas on Instagram about an exercise, but you should propose it to the athlete in a way that he will manage to do it, and it must have a relevance in what has done before and where you intended to go. But really, hearing that from Merlin, that she was using very simple exercises and building up more complexity on it, was it's something I will never forget.
Was Merlin Otti the one with the fingernails?
No.
Who was that?
No. So there's two with long fingernails. The first one was Florence Griffith Joyner.
Yes. Who was the next
who
one?
holds the world records.
Yeah.
Yes. And Gail Devers also later. She's one of the two women who won, three women actually, won 2 Olympics at 100 meters. And I'm sure they would have similar things to say. I mean, the few things I know about those athletes is that they were very cautious about their body. They were very specific into details, and they also had great coaches. Bob Casey of course, he's been there for decades, several decades. So there must something good about what he has done and the way. And I know that Bob Casey was also a student about Eastern methods, as much as the Eastern coaches were students about what was done in US also. So I think it's important to interview athletes who had long careers. So Merlin is from Jamaica. She started running in 1974 and she ended her career in 2014.
What?
So, and her international career runs from 1979 to 2012. International career. So she knows much more about sprinting and muscle fibers from anyone else, and that's the kind of people I was watching on TV when I was a kid, and had the immense chance of bumping into her in the stadium. I was like, it's Merlin. Let's try to approach her and ask her a question. And since I was coaching a former rival of her, Christine Aron, she told me, yes. Oh, you're Christine Aron's coach, and she asked me questions. I was like, no, don't ask me questions. I want to ask you questions because I have lots to learn from you. And
was she the lady with did she have white hair?
So Christine, yes, that's
yes,
the one.
Yes.
You can record at 100 meter, yeah.
Yes.
And Merlin, she's been winning medals at every champs, every Olympics, and would never win the gold medal. And she finally did it in 1993, and everybody was happy for her. There was a 5-minute standing ovation on the crowds when she placed second at the 100 meters. She lost by 1,000 of a second. The whole stadium was, and the Gators and Grandparents applauding her, and was. She's a legend, and she's so. I was so afraid to go to speak to her, and actually found a woman that was willing to share, and I learned a lot from her. And she will always go to the basics.
I just want to jump in there, PJ. One thing that you have written a little bit about, which is why I've added it onto the list of things that we were going to chat about, was the polarization of intensity.
Yes.
Can you explain that and how
Okay.
explain that concept and how it might be applied?
So it goes from the focus on high intensity that was going on in the early 20th century with the first Olympic champions, 100 meters, they were all training in sprinting. Now they found out that they couldn't sprint every day, that they needed to rest, but they didn't want to rest, so they did the opposite thing of running fast. They did some jogs, some checkups, and some jogging. And you can find the program of Aki Han, who was Olympic champion in the first Olympics in the early 20th century. What he did was doing sprints, then 50% running, jogging, then next day sprint. So you get a variation of training because he didn't want to sprint every day. It didn't make sense. And for him, he found that it was more efficient to do that because he could, at the end, sprint more than just sprinting every day and get injured and tired. So he could recover this way. This kind of thing, of course, was interesting in the philosophy of Eastern Bloc because it's dialectic. And then you have to think that those authors were not really published in the Western world, where most of our culture is, from newspaper and sports science newspaper, which were not really science as we understand now, because sports science now is found on peer-to-peer review journals or Twitter.
Of course.
But before, all the training science, coaching science was on journals from the federations, athletics federations mostly, or just coaching journals, but or highly secret research, which we have access now, but nobody had access before. Of course, it was secret state. One coach who worked a lot on polarization in high intensity training, power speed training, was Charlie Francis in the 80s.
I was going to mention that, yeah.
He evolved from volume-based training, inspired from Poland, to polarized training, because he was listening to his athletes and was listening to his main athlete from 84 and 85, which was Ben Johnson.
Yeah.
And he could see that Ben Johnson was better when he was sprinting high intensity, but he couldn't do it 2 days in a row, and he did it 40 hours recovery in between, and that he got it observing this elite athlete, and also reading books by Romanian Tudor Bompa. I thought I would forget his name. He was published it in early 80s in his books, that you 48 hours to recover your nervous system from high intensity. So that's how we came up with this method. Now it had also, you can find it also in distance running. Paavo Nurmi was using long, slow stuff, but also sprints at the end of workouts to get a kind of balance, right? And they knew that, quarter milers, middle distance runners knew that it's very exhausting to work in that middle part, what we call lactic workouts. We no longer call it lactic because we have a different interpretation of what's going on now on the body regarding bioenergetics. But the middle part, in between being slow and being very fast, this middle part where you get a lot of lactic acid, is very tiring, and you cannot do a lot and it didn't require a lot of scientific research. People could figure out by themselves, they were training every day.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
And it was tiring for those athletes. So you've got in rowing, you've got great studies about it in the 80s that you should only devote that middle part of the training. I call it middle part because it's mid intensity, high like that, because you do it in very specific. It's very specific to competition because that's the kind of biomarkers you can record at the end of a competition. It should only devote later in the training, very progressive building up to this, and not much often on the training because it's very tiring. You don't improve a lot. It makes you crash. And it's better to be very progressive with that and focusing on high intensity, low intensity, and progressively in a concurrent way towards this. You find a lot of sprint training programs like this from the 60s, 70s in East Germany, concurrent training, low intensity, high intensity, and the conjunctions, you build up and you arrive later on with that middle part of mid intensity, high lactate. Whether you call it lactate or not doesn't really matter. You change. You call it high acidosis or whatever, but we call it a fuel now for the muscles.
Yes.
Yes, it's fuel for the muscles, but well, try to do it a lot. You will see that your athlete will crash down. Why? Because athletes been there. I mean, all the training in the 60s was geared toward this, doing as much as possible, but it led to a good thing about it is it improved a lot the medical science because those athletes ended up doing massage almost every day. You've got a lot of East Germans doing 250 massage a year, trying to recover from this high volume.
Yes.
Then when they understood that this volume is too much and even doping is not helping anymore to try to make the body recover, all those hydrotherapy, massage, cryotherapy, and so on was actually falling the athletes apart, and they couldn't do more than one Olympiad. They're starting to be more reasonable with volume and play with intensity and find the optimal intensity, but also the optimal volume. And when they started having Olympic champion, becoming Olympic champion out of these high volumes, and they started to change, the paradigms and theories and build up new things. They were quite agile with their methods already because they were pragmatic. They were very dogmatic, but also pragmatic. At the end of the day, what matters was winning medals, and it was very important, much more than it is now for our cultures. In some countries, it was very national pride. It was, and as I said, all the scientists were working on this, and coaches were like very scared because they need medals. If not, they were fired, and athletes as well. So that's my long answer for the polarization of training, but it has a relevance, historical reason for that. Now you see that there is a tension between the hype around polarization training and the hype regarding lactate is a fuel for muscles. That's interesting. Let's see how it goes, and but I can tell you it's been explored for in the past century, and it's very exciting research, and we will know more probably about how you should do it, when, and but it leads us to the period of training question, and it's been explored because everything was quantified back then in athletes in Eastern countries from the early 50s. And all this has a history, all this had an evolution, all this was confronted with dogmas, but also with the need to get results.
I just can't wait till I can say dogmatic and pragmatic in French when I'm learning.
You know, same thing.
Is it? Okay. Of course it
Probably
is.
it has Greek roots.
Okay. Excellent.
Pragmatic and dogmatic.
Easy. I'll impress my French teacher on Friday when I say it, and I'm just like, it's the same. It's the same. We all know it's the same. But PJ, I'm gonna do a little roundup. But thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And as all like seriously, I have so much respect for people that come on here when English is not their first language. So I honestly really do appreciate your time. But if anyone's got any questions, because I found this really, really interesting, because history is one of my passions as well. So to see that someone has taken history and sport and put them together and been so interested in it is superb. But if anyone's got any questions, where can people find you? Is Twitter the best place? We've spoken about it a little bit on there. Is Twitter the best place to find you?
Anywhere. Twitter, I try to be around and to interact with people in any way. Everybody will find my email or somehow. Or in the track, it's even better.
do you know your Twitter handle, PJ?
So PJ Vazel.
Perfect.
At PJ Vazel. Yeah.
Excellent. V-A-Z-E-L. V-A-Z-E-L.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I enjoy a lot to podcast. Obviously, the next one I won't bother hearing it. I'm looking forward to the next ones.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, PJ. Really appreciate your time, and we'll keep in touch. The next time we speak, we'll speak in French.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Check your progress.
Yes. Thank you, PJ. Bye bye.
À bientôt.